Hi, Lucy. I'm Sarah from Your Coming. Such a pleasure to speak to you today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time. Maybe we could just begin with a brief intro. I guess for people who don't know anything about Edge of Summer, what can they expect from your film?
So Edge of Summer is about an 11-year-old girl, and she arrives on holiday with her mum and in Cornwall, and she meets a local boy, and they make a sort of mysterious discovery which sort of fractures their understanding of life, and childhood as they know it unravels.
I love how it kind of feels quite kind of genre bending and very kind of unique in its storytelling and its tone. Maybe you could talk us through a little bit the genesis of the project. You know, what was the first germ of an idea that set you wanting to make this film?
I love this age, and I really wanted to get inside that moment between childhood and adolescence and that shift. It's such an interesting time where there's this growing awareness, but you still have a really vivid imagination. Wanted to create a story that really honored the kind of the beauty and pain and complexity of that moment. I think in terms of genre, my hope is that in a way, it is a reflection of that slightly woozy, strange moment in time where, in the film there are sort of elements of sort of thriller or an edge of horror and there's the drama, and it feels like an echo of that emotional state as well, where everything is quite heightened at that age as well. You really feel.
And I guess in terms of kind of capturing, yeah, exactly that sense of coming of age, not just in the story, but in the feeling of it. Were there other films that you were kind of using as reference points? I don't know, maybe a bit of
I
Andrea
love,
Arnold in the sense, that kind of space, maybe.
yeah, yeah. I love sort of kind of coming of age as a sort of as a genre, and also there's coming of age films which are sort of for adults as well. I'm a huge fan of Ratcatcher, um, and I thought I loved watching that film and really sort of being in this boy's world, and it was in his subconscious too. The Spirit of the Beehive, one of my kind of favorite films as well, and Walkabout had quite a big impact on me watching that when I was younger, which felt haunting and sort of scary, kind of coming of age story that was something out of a dream, yet really visceral too.
And absolutely phenomenal cast across the board. And, all of the characters and the relationships just feel so lived in, so authentic, so real. And I guess, maybe the biggest challenge in that sense was getting your young actors just right. And I know it was a sort of first time for Flora and Joel in front of the camera. So, how do you decide on your cast, but in particular for your two protagonists?
Yeah, I mean, we worked with Shaheen Bey, who's an amazing casting director as well. And we cast pretty close to the time, which was important because kids change so much. In a few months, then they're just are different. And with Flora, who plays Evie, she really had this quality in her where you could see both the child and the woman inside her. And in the film, she almost has this dance with her mother where you see the child in her mother too. And it we're kind of looking for something that because I mean, everything happens over a number of days, and there's this sort of huge change, and wanting to see this shift. And Flora's so good at kind of conveying her internal world in a very subtle way, which felt really like accomplished for her age. And with Joel, the challenge was sort of in finding a 12-year-old boy who he's like it's a very self-conscious age. Joel, not only did he just really bring it and was so good at like listening and adapting, but he has this like such a big heart, sort of openness to kind of vulnerability and feeling as well. So they're very different. They're quite different as both people and as performers, and the way that they worked as well. But that was something we wanted to. I kind of wanted an unlikely pairing.
And I guess, just getting them individually, like the right person to play each role was going to be important. But then it's also going to be the interactions between them, the dynamics between them. So I guess between the young pair, but then also like you're saying, with each of their mothers, and, we're sort of dipping in and out. We're seeing sort of, they're getting a glimpse of this adult world that they're trying to make sense of, and the relationships with, between their parents. And there's a real emotional intensity to that. So how did you, I guess, whether there's a lot of rehearsal time maybe, or, create a safe space on set for those relationship dynamics to develop?
Yeah, I mean, we never, we never really rehearsed actual scenes. They had an awareness of what the story was, which they really needed because we weren't shooting chronologically, so we move around the scenes quite a lot. And then they would just get their lines the night before, to know. A part of that is neither of them would over rehearse by themselves anyway. And Flora, would always say, I don't know what anyone else is going to do, so like, how can I practice? And she definitely wanted to sort of be there in the moment. I think it was more a case of creating that space where they felt safe. We would tend to pull as many people away as possible. So it would just be Rachel, the DP, myself, and the sound person often. And we would, I guess, give it time just to get in the feeling of the moment. Quite often we did silent takes, which was something the DP suggested, where we just took all of the dialogue out. And often we do those quite early on because the words don't really matter. And if you don't need to say them, great. And I think it really helped them not rely on those words, that they would be the last thing to come. I always said, just don't say anything unless you feel it. There's no rush. And so that really slowed things down so they could just, feel their way through the scene and find other ways to sort of communicate with each other and really sense each other as well when you take all of the words away. Yeah, and they with their their on-screen mothers, Nicola Burley and Josie Walker, are amazing and so supportive of them as well. Like, there was a lot of trust that built up there. I mean, Josie's great at improvising too. Flora loved that. Nicola just so warm that there was a real trust between the two of them, which was lovely. We did a little bit of workshopping beforehand where they just developed their relationship as sort of mother and child a little bit, not on the script, but just, in fact, it was around memories of time before the film began. And so they could create them together, which gave them their own sort of lived backstory.
And of course, the setting is absolutely crucial, I guess, kind of, the location almost being a character in and of itself. But then also the backdrop of it being kind of this small community. There's mention made of, the mines closing and the hardship they're going through. So that's all kind of seeping in as well to the storytelling. So how important was it being in that location and having that as part of the backdrop?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, the location was crucial. I mean, I wrote the script after finding the location, and that's important to me. Maybe coming from a documentary background, I kind of feel like I need that as well, too. And indeed, I wrote a little bit like down there on holiday, with my family, and I always knew it was going to be set in the sort of early 90s. I mean, I was that age there then, and Cornwall was this sort of place where like the land just sort of groans with myths and legends. It just has this kind of lived in memory and history around it, where going even as an adult, but certainly as a child, there's just like, it's just wonderful, the light, and it has this mysticism, and it's a place where grown-ups believe in myths and folklore as well, which felt like it was like that was really important. I mean, we film it down in a place called sort of Pendine, where there is a mine there which had closed at the time, and which had a huge impact on the community like as well. In many ways it's sort of wanting to have this sense of transition and change everywhere in the film. It's a coming of age for the kids, it's a coming of age for the parents, the community is going through this shift, and there's always this untethering and like letting go, which is sort of echoed in different like levels, I think. So yeah, the location as well, it's I wanted it to be out on the edge to kind of reflect what their emotional state, how you can look at that expansive sea and it can be both beautiful and petrifying, you know, the unknown, full of possibility, and the two edges of that which they're kind of sat upon at this moment in their lives. So yeah, I couldn't imagine it being anywhere else, and it offered so much.
And I guess being out in that kind of rugged environment, I mean, I wonder, was there any moment that was particularly difficult to film, a particular scene, or on the flip side, one that you really enjoyed? But I don't know, being down on that mine or.
Yeah, the mines are challenging. I mean, just because it's dark and you want it to be really dark, but there was a lot of different head torches action going on, and it's just challenging, that is. And in fact, the mine is there's the tunnel to the mine is in one location, the entrance to the mine is the other location, and when they're around the shaft, that's on the set. The kids did so well actually, because sometimes that was weeks apart where they filmed the beginning of the scene, then the middle of the scene, then the end of the scene, to kind of stay in that place. I mean, they're phenomenal, the mines are, though. Like, they're just, I found it really emotional being down there, just like the sense of these people, working down there, and it's just, you feel a real presence. I mean, there was one scene that we had, we always called it the Peter Pan scene. It's a scene where they're sort of dancing together or sort of leaping around. It was always moving around the schedule, and we thought we were looking for like good weather. And then it just became more critical to get it done. And Steadicam was coming in at this, and it was windy and it was spatting with rain, and it seemed like, oh, we've just got to go for it, we don't. And it turns out, like, you wouldn't change the weather for the world. If this sort of fog had landed on them, which sort of shrouded it in this sort of dreamlike, quality. So that was definitely, other than that, we sort of like had glorious weather as well. But it was one of the things where you think it won't work, but then it really did.
And in terms of the takeaways from watching the film, and I guess a lot of the points we've already touched on about kind of putting the audience back in, that feeling of being that age, how your imagination works, how fluid things can seem, and what's purely reality and what's partly your imagination. But there's also that element of the sort of dynamics between them and their mothers. Of where, is there a temptation as adults to kind of be a bit dismissive or not to engage with our kids about difficult topics? And actually, that's where rifts can form. And it's something about actually, having those communication channels open can be much more healthy for the growth of a child and for you as a parent.
I think that's it. It's kind of about connection. And I think not talking about something rarely protects a child. And I think having those conversations, as difficult as they are, can be better than leaving a child alone with their imagination, which can be far more scary, because kids know, like, they're really smart as well. And you mentioned about sort of being dismissive then too. I mean, the kids are the real heroes in this film. Like, they have so much wisdom. They're the ones that help the adults grow up. Yeah, it is. I think it's sort of like that kind of communication is something, I guess, for grown-ups, but also for young people now. Like, things can be dismissed. So much what happens when you're growing up happens in secret, partly because you don't have the words to articulate it, but other times sort of, people don't really know. And I think anything that can convey like the real pain and complexity of that time and sort of acknowledge and recognize that, can be useful. I imagine, not only an adult seeing it and sort of being transported back to that time, but if there was a teenager and their parent watching it, both would recognize something, within it.
What does it mean to you to have the film at Glasgow Film Festival? And, how, I guess, do you see this as part of your filmography, with the success you had of Kingdom of Us? Will you now sort of stay in fiction film? Will you flip between documentary and fiction? What do you think might be next?
Yeah, so excited about Glasgow. I mean, it's a world premiere, so it's sort of like the first time we're going to have an audience there, and yeah, I can't wait for that moment as well. Nerve-wracking, exciting, loads and loads of feelings. Really, like, lovely for the cast too, to have that moment. And I mean, in terms of me, I definitely want to continue in fiction as well. kind of, I really like this sort of slightly hybrid genre place, really, and to see how much that could be pushed in, in different ways. But equally, I love documentary. I mean, there's not a huge difference between the two, like, in many ways. Like, there's so much that both like require, and it's all just sort of storytelling. So yeah, so I see myself kind of working in both in the future.
And I guess really finally, how do you see the health of the industry and opportunities for, whether it's in documentary, whether it's in fiction filmmaking? Do you feel that, we're in a good place right now, particularly for female directors, I guess? Or do you think there's a lot of progress to be made to make access a bit easier?
You can look at the past couple of years gone by, and it looks like, of course, there has been amazing films out there from female filmmakers, and there's been like lots of hugely successful debuts, and it's kind of grey, and I definitely can see that to continue. However, I think it's a really difficult time. I mean, I find like I'm at this moment, I've had my debut, now it's the next thing beyond that, and there's not a load of funding out there as well, and that's tough. And so it just feels like it's exciting, but there's still huge amount of risk there, and risk is a privilege in that sense, and it becomes an industry which does become limited as well. I mean, I sort of feel on a governmental level that support for the arts could be a lot better, and without that there, it can feel an industry that lots of people wouldn't be able to entertain the idea of kind of entering. I mean, I've got two children, and which come with childcare costs as well, which aren't great in this country either. And if I was a single parent, this wouldn't be an option because of the level of risk that it entails, and the lack of support if that doesn't pay off, or in the with the volatility of things. So therefore there will be women out there with amazing stories to tell who don't feel like that they can tell them, and that is not down to the BFI, BBC Film 4 have been hugely supportive. They do all they can. I think it's the arts in general and those other things that support people and women working in those industries.
But thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and can't wait for everyone else to have the chance to see Edge of Summer, and of course really enjoy the premiere there in Glasgow.
Great, thank you so much.
So nice to chat to you, Lucy. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.